it's Forrest again, just riding down America's highways, transporting vehicles. Today I was just going to go over a little something. I mean, if you're brand new to trucking in general, hotshot trucking or regular trucking, doesn't matter, then you know you have to have logs. And those logs, unless you have a really old truck, you have to have the digital logs, which most people have to have, because I mean, I think the rule is like 1996 or something like that. I'm not positive of the year, but somewhere back in there, you don't have to have logs. But don't have to have digital logs. You still have to have a log, but you have a handwritten log. But the idea is that if you have these logs, that you're supposed to track how long you're driving. In most clocks, you have an 11-hour drive clock, an 8-hour break, and a 14-hour shift cycle. And so, but I mean, if you're on a 7-day, if you're on an 8-day, it differentiates a little bit. But either way. But a lot of people, when they first start into the business, they're worried about, getting the loads, where the loads are going and things. And they think about the clock, but they think about the clock more in terms of, am I going to run out of time? And the problem is, sometimes, let's say you pick up a load and you're going from Atlanta to Tampa. That's a pretty long run. And if you have a far enough run, you could run out of clock time before you got there, right? Let's say you were running, you left Jacksonville, you went to Atlanta, that's like 5 hours, you picked up and you were headed to Tampa, right? So, you have to do a 10-hour break there somewhere. And the reality is, some people, what they do is they'll run all the 11 hours out and then they'll take that 10 hours. And then what happens to them is maybe they're in such a position that when they run the 10 hours out, the next morning they're not driving until 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And, I can tell you from experience, this is what I did when I first started driving. I actually ran into that problem a couple of times where I didn't figure the clock out and say, you know what, I'm probably better off going down now and then taking the 10 hours and then leaving really early and pulling the next shift really early. That way I'm driving, especially, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, which is where it's really easier to drive, especially if you're not too far from a destination or whatever, big cities. But a lot of people, when they first start, they don't think about that. So they wind up with this, like I did one time. I got almost to my destination because I left Atlanta, and I should have stayed in Atlanta before leaving, because I could have found some place because of the time of day it was that when I was in Atlanta. But because I had left Atlanta and drove and tried to ring out the clock, I got to a time of night where it's almost impossible to find some place to stop. There's no rest areas, truck stops are full, rest areas are full, everything like this. And I don't really like sitting on the side of the road. I mean, you can do it, but sometimes with state troopers, you get one that's really not good, and so you wind up with these problems, right? So I wound up going to Fort Myers. I wound up just north of Tampa, and I'd rung out my clock, but it was like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So by the time I put 10 hours on, I couldn't drive the next day till almost noon. And that was a problem, because then it pushed my whole day back. I had to actually, on that week, I actually had to wait until my reset in order to get out of that path, So that's just something to be aware of when you start dealing with ELD. I mean, I can go over functionality of the ELD and some things you can do to help that, and I may do that in a later video. But this is just a video to touch on, what I experienced when I first got into it, how the ELD works, and and figuring out that time. So now, I've been doing it for a while now. So now what I do is, not only do I figure out my earliest pickup, earliest drop-offs, all those things you got to have, and calculate distances and how long it's going to take to get there, for the drop-off times, estimate it, add a little extra in for your times, for your pick-off and drop-off times, and for something to go wrong or traffic or whatever, you start doing all that. But then I start thinking about, what about the clock, and where is that going to put me at, and where's the best place for me to stop and lay down at? And I tell you, to be honest with you, I like to get off the road by 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Because if I can get off the road at, say, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, then, you know, you're 10 hours from there is what, about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning that you get to pick up and go again. And that's really the time I want to drive. Because then if I'm 5 hours away, say, from my first drop off or pickup or whatever it might be, usually drop off, if I'm like 4 hours away, I can drive that 4 hours and be there like when they first open, right? And then get in and get out of there when they first open, and then on and so forth and so on, and then I'm ready to lay down again at the same time all over again, right? So I'm off the road again by 4 or 5 o'clock. And so, I mean, it's just one of those things where you really want to do it that way. Anyway, if you need any more information, you can just ask any question you want, and I'll answer it down in the comments. Thank you.